In sports, we always have these guys that are deemed as generational prospects. In basketball, you have LeBron James, and more so recently, Victor Wembanyama. In tennis, you got Coco Gauff. And in football, you've had Andrew Luck, Trevor Lawrence, and more so recently, Caleb Williams. But before Luck, Lawrence, and Williams, you had Jimmy Clausen. Clausen was viewed as the kid with the golden arm, the football version of LeBron James. But his career path had another trajectory. Let's find out why and what happened to Jimmy Clausen.
Jimmy Clausen was the #1 player in the country for many different reasons, and he was just a tremendous passer, more advanced than most quarterbacks.
To begin this story, we gotta go all the way back to when Jimmy Clausen was in 5th grade. Clausen comes from a football family, as his 2 older brothers, Rick and Casey Clausen, both played collegiate football. According to an ESPN article, one Friday night before a high school game, Jimmy Clausen wanted to help his older brother Casey Clausen warm up. Clausen's dad, Jim Clausen, decided to say yes and let Jimmy Clausen down there to go help his brother warm up. And this is where the hype began, as Casey and Jimmy was down on the field, throwing the ball back and forth, and every time Casey would throw to Jimmy, Jimmy would take a couple steps back. And as the 2 brothers are throwing the ball back and forth, the crowd starts to pay attention. And it's not because of future Tennessee quarterback Casey Clausen, it's because of Jimmy Clausen, the 5th grader. And the first couple of throws were just easy 10-yard throws. After the first couple 10-yard throws, they started making longer passes. Next thing you know, Clausen is making a couple 20-yard throws, a couple 30-yard throws, and a couple 40-yard throws, and he's making it look easy. And the crowd that was waiting for this game to start was amazed that this 10 or 11-year-old kid was making these easy throws. Now, a local reporter saw this and printed out, "Keep an eye out for the youngest Clausen." And after this warm-up with his older brother, the hype began on Jimmy Clausen. Now, I think something to add to the hype of Jimmy Clausen was the fact that both his brothers played college football. Now, the second oldest brother, Rick Clausen, didn't have the greatest college career, started out at LSU, transferred to Tennessee where he had about 2,000 passing yards and only 14 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. The oldest brother Casey was a different story, as he played at Tennessee all 4 years, had over 9,000 passing yards and 75 touchdowns as a volunteer. Now, this is a common thing in sports. If your dad or your older siblings are good at a certain sport and you are the son or the youngest sibling of those people, then the people want to see how good you can become also. Some recent examples of this is Arch Manning being the nephew of Eli and Peyton Manning and being hyped up. You also got Bronny James and Bryce James who are under a microscope because, well, their dad is LeBron James, arguably the greatest player to touch a basketball. An even older example is the NBA legend Reggie Miller trying to come up out of the shadow of his older sister, Cheryl Miller. So as long as your parent or relative is really good at sports and you're really good at sports on the come up, then you are going to be under a microscope. This time though, it was Jimmy Clausen that was under the microscope and he was living up to the hype. Clausen would play for White Oaks High School in California, where he would lead them to an undefeated record every year, being a perfect 42-0 as a starter. Clausen would throw over 9,000 yards and he would have 136 passing touchdowns according to Max Preps, but other sites say he had 146 touchdowns thrown. He also only had 17 interceptions and a 68% completion percentage. He will lead White Oaks to the first CIF state championship in school history. Clausen's best season came during his sophomore year, where he had over 3,600 passing yards and 57 touchdowns, but it's an interesting story also from that season. According to that same ESPN article mentioned earlier, during the sophomore season, Clausen and his team was down to the rivals at halftime. Not only were they down to the rivals, but they were also missing their star tailback, Mark Tyler. The story states that Clausen calmed his team down and told them, "I got this. We're going to play like we've been coached and win this game by 2 touchdowns. Eventually, there was a play where Clausen made a defender miss and threw a 60-yard bomb for a touchdown. And according to the rival head coach, Clausen stopped in front of him and said, "What do you think about that?" Oh, and to add insult to injury, Clausen and his team won by 3 touchdowns. All of this happened in his sophomore season, and this is where the hate began. Now we can jump to his junior season, where Sports Illustrated dubbed him as the kid with the golden arm. Multiple recruiting sites had him #1 overall, and they deemed him as a once-in-a-decade type quarterback prospect. For the cherry on top, you had Steve Clarkson, longtime great quarterback coach, deem him as the high school football version of LeBron James. And if you didn't know, LeBron James was hyped up to be the face of the NBA after MJ retired. LeBron would also be featured on the cover of every major sports magazine during his time in high school, and he had ESPN going to all his games, being commentated by Dick Vitale. So it was pretty big shoes to fill, but it wasn't like Steve Clarkson wasn't qualified to say that. Up until that point, Clarkson had developed both Matt Leinart and Big Ben. Again, with all this hype that Clausen was getting, comes hate.
More of a technician as a quarterback, and that comes from years of coaching.
Team being more talented than others. Clausen's high school team contained about a dozen players that played D1. This included running back Mark Tyler. Then we fast forward to the US All-American Bowl, where Clausen was outplayed by Ryan Mallett. Now, it wasn't like this was a bad thing, as Mallett was a number 4 ranked overall player in his class, and he was Gatorade Player of the Year in 2006. The only problem is that Ryan Mallett didn't have the hype behind his name like Jimmy Clausen did. The final criticism for Clausen was the fact that he was 19 during his senior season. This was due to him starting kindergarten at 6 years old and him having to repeat the 6th grade. And we all know Clausen had every offer in the book, but he decided on Notre Dame. But his commitment wasn't a regular commitment, as he did it at the College Football Hall of Fame, where he pulled up in a stretch limo, then committed to Notre Dame and said he wanted to win multiple national titles. After his commitment to the Irish, he would have a setback during the offseason, having surgery on his elbow. And during Notre Dame's only spring practice, he would only throw short passes, casting some doubts on his arm strength. Notre Dame would start the season off with a loss to Georgia Tech, and after this game, Clausen was named the starter. Clausen would start the next 6 games but only see 1 win. He would even be benched for Evan Sharpley after a bad performance against Boston College. Clausen was benched for the USC and Navy game, but he eventually won a starting job again for the Air Force game. And Clausen's freshman season stats weren't the greatest. He only threw for 1,200 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions, and completed 56% of his passes. The worst part about that season for Clausen is that he was sacked a team record 34 times. And to add on to that, Notre Dame and Clausen went 3-9 that season. Now, in Clausen's sophomore season, his numbers took a jump in every major statistical category. Clausen would complete 60% of his passes for 3,100 yards and 25 touchdowns. However, he would still struggle with turnovers, throwing 17 interceptions. On the bright side, not only did Clausen improve, Notre Dame also improved as they went 7-6, and they won the Hawaii Bowl against Hawaii, and Clausen was named Bowl Games MVP. Clausen's junior year was huge for him because this was his chance to prove why he was the #1 prospect in his class. And Clausen's junior season was his best season, throwing for 3,700 yards, 28 touchdowns, and only 4 interceptions. Again though, Notre Dame and Clausen would miss a bowl game as they went 6-6. Unsurprisingly though, Clausen would forego his senior season and enter his name to the NFL draft. Now, there was still some hype around Clausen's name, it just wasn't #1 pick hype. Though Mel Kiper, NFL draft analyst, said that he's done if Jimmy Clausen isn't a successful NFL quarterback. And the draft was really important for Jimmy Clausen, as when Casey was up to get drafted, he watched and watched and watched his brother not get picked at all in the NFL draft. And after Casey's draft wrapped up, he looked at Jimmy and told him, "Don't let this happen to you." Jimmy told reporters that he'll never forget those words that his brother told him that day. Despite it not being a great quarterback class for Jimmy Clausen's draft, he still went in the 2nd round to the Carolina Panthers. Clausen would get his first start against the Cincinnati Bengals, where he would have a bad game as he fumbled 3 times and lost 2 of them. Clausen would start up to week 5, where he got pulled after a bad performance against the Saints. Although Clausen would get to start 10 times this season, he will only throw for 1,500 yards, 3 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, and he will fumble 9 times. And with the Panthers having the worst record in the NFL and getting the #1 pick, they had their eyes set on Auburn quarterback Cam Newton. And after the Panthers picked Cam Newton, Clausen actually wanted to charge Cam Newton $1 million for his #2 jersey, but Cam actually ended up wearing #1 instead. And after a preseason battle, Cam would win the starting quarterback position, and it would end Jimmy Clausen's time in Carolina. After 3 seasons of not playing for the Panthers, Clausen would go to Chicago, where he would play 2 seasons. Then he would go to the Baltimore Ravens, where he spent 1 season, and after that he would retire from the NFL. And after retiring, Clausen would actually join the Professional Flag Football League with guys like Chad Ochocinco and Nick Collins. He also helped guys like Baker Mayfield go through the draft process when it was their turn to be drafted. And as of today, what I could find is that he's married with 3 children and he does something in real estate. But there's not one main reason to why Jimmy Clausen's career didn't turn out how it expected. Some people can point to the fact that, hey, maybe his high school team was more talented than most, so he was able to squeak by in high school. Some might say it was that elbow surgery that he got going into his freshman season at Notre Dame that maybe took away some of his golden arm, as maybe that surgery affected some of his arm strength and his accuracy. And the final reason to why Clausen didn't pan out would be his turnovers. If you look at his first 2 years in college, he was turnover prone, and if you look at all his years through the NFL, he was turnover prone. The only one season that he wasn't was his junior season at Notre Dame. But honestly, I think it's a combination of all 3. And that is what happened to Jimmy Clausen and why his career turned out the way it did. Let me know what y'all think down in the comments below. And until next time, I'm out. Peace.